The Tylox had traveled across the galaxy, visiting countless planets and studying different life forms, but nothing prepared them for what they saw on Earth. Commander Varex stood inside the observation deck of their invisible spaceship, his four glowing eyes focused on the screens in front of him. The images showed humans walking freely among Earth's most dangerous creatures: massive lions, sharp-toothed wolves, and deadly bears. "This is impossible," Varex muttered, his voice filled with disbelief. Beside him, scientist Relkor adjusted the controls, zooming in on a strange sight below. A human, dressed in a red uniform, stood calmly in front of a roaring lion. The beast could easily crush the fragile creature with a single strike. But instead, the lion sat down, licking its paws like a harmless cub. Relkor's hands trembled. "Commander, how can a weak species like humans control such powerful predators?" Virex's mind raced. Every intelligent species they had encountered ruled through force. The strong dominated the weak. It was the law of nature. Yet, humans were different. They had no claws, no fangs, no thick armor. And still, Earth's deadliest creatures obeyed them. "Perhaps they use advanced technology," Varex suggested. He tapped a button on the control panel. The ship's scanners swept across the area, searching for hidden devices or mind-controlling signals. The results came back negative. No control chips, no brainwave signals, nothing. Relkor confirmed. "This is not technology. This is something else." Virex's frustration grew. If the Tylox could unlock this secret, they could become the most powerful rulers in the galaxy. A species that could control predators without force would be unstoppable. "We need to study them closer," Varex ordered. "Send in the observation drones." Small, invisible drones flew down from the spaceship, silently recording the humans and their animals. The Tylox watched as a man walked with a giant black wolf beside him. The beast could rip him apart in seconds, but instead, it followed him like an obedient soldier. The man spoke softly, and the wolf wagged its tail in response. Relkor's eyes widened. They are communicating. But how? Another screen showed a woman feeding raw meat to a tiger. The enormous striped beast took the food gently from her hands, as if afraid of harming her. "This does not make sense," Varex whispered. "Predators kill. That is their nature. Why do they submit to humans?" Relkor turned to him, his voice almost trembling. "Perhaps humans are not weak as we thought. Perhaps they possess something we do not understand." Varex clenched his fists. The idea disturbed him. The Tylox ruled through fear, through strength. But humans did not dominate through force. They controlled Earth's deadliest creatures with something far more powerful: trust and respect. "We must dig deeper," Varex growled. "Prepare the next phase of the experiment. We will bring the human aboard and see how they control the beasts." As the spaceship hovered unseen above Earth, the Tylox prepared to unlock a secret that would change everything they knew about power. The dark chamber was silent, except for the rhythmic beeping of alien machines. Bright blue lights flickered along the curved walls, casting eerie shadows over the sleek metal floor. In the center of the room, a single glass enclosure stood, surrounded by a team of Xylox scientists. Inside it, lying unconscious, was a human. Commander Varex watched from a raised platform, his four glowing eyes narrowing as he studied the fragile-looking creature. The human, a male in his mid-30s, had short dark hair and a lean build. He wore a simple uniform, tan pants, and a green jacket, slightly worn from use. The Tylox had chosen him carefully. He was no ordinary human. He was Dr. James Carter, a zoologist known for working closely with Earth's most dangerous predators. If there was anyone who could reveal the truth behind human control over beasts, it was him. Scientist Relkor tapped a control panel, and a soft hissing sound filled the chamber as a thin mist was released into the enclosure. The human stirred. His fingers twitched. His breathing became deeper. Then, with a sharp inhale, James Carter's eyes snapped open. For a moment, he lay still, confused. His gaze darted around, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings, the smooth metallic walls, the glowing blue symbols, the strange figures standing beyond the glass. His mind raced. This wasn't Earth. James sat up slowly, instinct taking over. He wasn't restrained, but the way the aliens watched him sent a clear message. He was their experiment. A voice echoed through the chamber, speaking in perfect English. "Human, do not be alarmed." James turned his head toward the source of the voice. It was coming from a tall, imposing figure standing above the others. The alien's skin was deep gray, with faint patterns of luminescent green running down his arms. His face was smooth, lacking a nose, with 4 piercing yellow eyes that never blinked. James took a slow breath. He wasn't afraid. Not yet. He had spent years studying animal behavior, and right now, these aliens reminded him of predators studying their prey. He met the commander's gaze. "Where am I?" "You are aboard the vessel of the Psylocke's Dominion," Virex said, his voice carrying an air of authority. "You have been chosen for an important study." James's eyes narrowed. "Study?" Without answering, Virex raised a clawed hand. A deep rumbling sound echoed through the chamber as a section of the wall slid open. James turned just in time to see a massive lion step into the room. The beast was enormous, easily larger than any lion James had ever encountered. Its golden mane shimmered under the artificial lights, its muscles rippling beneath its thick hide. But something was off. The lion's eyes glowed faintly with an unnatural red hue. It wasn't acting like a normal lion. It was moving slowly, almost sluggishly, as if disoriented. Virex's voice rang out again. "We have studied your kind. You walk among predators without fear. You control them without force. We wish to understand how." James clenched his jaw. So that was it. The Psylocks wanted to test him. They wanted to see if he could tame a beast that wasn't just from Earth, but enhanced by alien hands. The lion let out a low guttural growl. Its ears twitched, its tail flicking in agitation. It was confused. It didn't understand where it was. And James knew exactly what that meant. The Psylocks had underestimated something crucial. A stressed, cornered predator was the most dangerous kind. Slowly, carefully, James rose to his feet. He made no sudden movements. His mind worked fast, assessing the situation. The lion's breathing was uneven, its muscles tense. It was looking for an escape. The Psylocks watched in silence, their glowing eyes locked onto the scene before them. James took a single step forward. The lion's ears perked. Another step. The lion's body lowered slightly, muscles coiling. James knew that look. It was preparing to attack. But he didn't stop. Instead, he did something that made the Psylocks murmur in confusion. He lowered his head slightly, avoiding direct eye contact. It was a simple, instinctive gesture, one that a predator would recognize as non-threatening. The lion hesitated. James softened his stance, his movements slow, deliberate. "Easy," he murmured, his voice calm. "You don't want to fight. You're just scared." The Psylocks were stunned. They saw no weapons, no control devices, no force. And yet, the lion's aggression seemed to waver. Virex's eyes narrowed. What is he doing? Relker's fingers danced over his control panel. He's communicating. The lion took a cautious step forward, its gaze locked onto James. James did not retreat. Instead, he did the unthinkable. He knelt down. The Psylocks gasped. This was madness. To lower oneself before a predator, it was an invitation for death. But James knew better. He trusted the lion's instincts. He knew that right now, in this moment, it needed reassurance. The lion's growl faded into a deep, uncertain rumble. Then, it did the impossible. It took another step forward, and slowly sat down. Silence filled the chamber. The Psylocks couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. Virex's voice was a whisper. "How?" James exhaled slowly, keeping his voice steady. You think humans control animals? He shook his head. That's where you're wrong. He reached out, gently running his fingers through the lion's mane. The beast closed its eyes for a brief moment, letting out a soft huff. We don't control them, James said. We understand them. For the first time in his life, Commander Virex felt something unexpected. Doubt. Everything he had believed about dominance, control, and power had just been challenged, and he wasn't sure he liked the answer. The silence in the chamber was suffocating. Commander Virex's 4 eyes locked onto the human standing before him. James Carter, a mere earthling, had done the impossible. He had tamed the enhanced predator without force, without weapons, without fear. The great lion, genetically modified by Psylocke scientists to be stronger, faster, and more aggressive, now sat beside the human like a mere house cat. This was not what the Psylocks had expected. Virex clenched his jaw, his sharp teeth pressing together. This human had challenged their understanding of power. The Psylocks believed in dominance. Their entire civilization thrived on control, of planets, of species, of knowledge. Yet here was a fragile human who had achieved something through understanding rather than force. This is a trick, Virex declared, his voice echoing through the chamber. Human deception. James smirked, crossing his arms. You think I hypnotized him? He gestured to the lion, who let out a deep, lazy yawn. I didn't control him. I calmed him. Virex's eyes narrowed. Then prove it. A sudden hiss filled the air as a new section of the chamber opened. James turned toward the source of the sound. His stomach tightened. A massive cage was being lowered into the room. Inside, pacing with slow, deliberate movements, was a creature unlike anything James had ever seen. It resembled a panther, sleek, black, and powerful. But this beast was clearly not from Earth. It had 6 legs, glowing silver eyes, and a long, spiked tail that flicked through the air like a whip. James instinctively stepped back. Meet the Nivrax beast, Virex said, his voice laced with dark amusement. A predator from the farthest edges of the Psylocks Empire. It hunts in absolute darkness, senses fear like a shark senses blood, and kills without hesitation. The cage rattled as the beast slammed its body against the bars. Its growl was a low, guttural sound that made the very walls tremble. James swallowed hard. The lion was one thing. He had studied lions, understood them. But this was an alien predator. He had no idea how it would react. You claim to understand predators, Virex continued. Let's see if that applies beyond your little planet. James took a deep breath. Stay calm. Panic would only make things worse. The cage door released with a loud clang. The Nivrax beast lunged forward in an instant. James had less than a second to react. He did not run. He did not scream. Instead, he stood his ground. The beast skidded to a stop just inches from him. Its silver eyes locked onto his. It let out a bone-chilling snarl, exposing sharp, curved fangs that dripped with some kind of venom. James didn't move. He couldn't afford to. His mind raced. This creature was different, smarter, more aware. It wasn't attacking out of hunger. It was studying him. A test. James made a decision. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered himself to one knee. The Psylocke scientists gasped in horror. Was he surrendering? But James wasn't giving up. He was taking a gamble. If this predator was anything like Earth's, it would recognize confidence. It would understand respect. The Nivrax beast growled again, stepping closer. Its hot breath hit James's face. The venom on its fangs sizzled against the air. James kept his breathing steady. Show no fear. Then, in the softest voice, he spoke. I know you don't want to fight. The beast's ears flicked. A reaction. In courage, James continued, his voice smooth, calm. You're not a mindless killer, are you? The Nivrax beast's growl softened, just slightly. James held its gaze, reading the creature. Its body was still tense, its tail twitching, but something was changing. Curiosity. This wasn't what it expected from prey. James reached out, slowly. Every Psylocke in the room froze. This was insanity. The Nivrax beast had never been tamed. It was pure instinct, pure aggression. No species had ever stood before it and lived. And yet, the beast hesitated. James's fingers were now inches from its sleek, black fur. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. One wrong move, and he was dead. Then, contact. His hand touched its head. The beast did not attack. Instead, it let out a deep, rumbling purr, a sound of acceptance. The chamber erupted in chaos. Psylocke scientists shouted in disbelief. Virex's fists clenched. This was impossible. The Nivrax beast, the deadliest predator that Psylocke had ever known, had just submitted to a human. James exhaled, slowly pulling his hand back. The beast tilted its head, watching him, no longer hostile. James looked up at Virex. He had proven his point. "Still think it's a trick?" James asked, his voice steady. Virex's face was unreadable. He had seen enough. He turned sharply to Relkor. "Take the human to the observation chamber." James frowned. "What now?" Virex's glowing eyes locked onto him. "You've impressed me, human," he admitted. "But we are not done." The doors hissed open, and armed guards stepped forward. James's stomach sank. He had just passed the first test. But the real challenge was yet to come. James's wrists were bound in a cold, metallic grip as the Psylocke guards escorted him down a long, dimly lit corridor. The air smelled sterile, with an underlying metallic tongue, like blood that had long since dried. The sound of his own footsteps echoed unnervingly against the sleek walls. He didn't resist. There was no point. Not yet. But his mind raced. What was next? He had proven himself with the lion. He had shocked them with the Nivrax beast. But he knew that Psylocke wouldn't stop there. They needed to break him. Commander Virex walked beside him, silent and brooding. Every so often, James caught the Psylocke leader glancing at him with a mixture of intrigue and frustration. Virex was a warrior, raised in a society that valued domination above all else. And James had shattered their beliefs twice now. The corridor opened into a vast, circular chamber. James's breath hitched. This was different. The arena before him was far larger than the previous one, its floor made of smooth black stone. Tall walls stretched high, forming a dome overhead. Translucent panels lined the upper edges, and beyond them, hundreds of Psylocke spectators gathered. They had come to watch, to witness his downfall. James's pulse quickened. Whatever they had planned, it was going to be big. He turned to Virex. "You love your little experiments, don't you?" Virex smirked, his sharp teeth glinting under the cold artificial light. "You should be honored, human. You have intrigued the High Council." James raised an eyebrow. "Oh, great. Am I getting a medal?" Virex ignored his sarcasm. He lifted a clawed hand and gestured toward the far end of the chamber. The floor shook as a massive gate rumbled open. James steeled himself. A deep, guttural growl echoed through the chamber. The crowd above fell silent. Something massive stepped into the arena. James's breath caught. The creature before him was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was a fusion of Earth's most fearsome predators and something wholly alien. It had the hulking body of a grizzly bear, thick and covered in dark, matted fur. Its elongated limbs were eerily feline, built for speed. Razor-sharp talons extended from each massive paw, clicking against the stone floor with every step. Its head was the most terrifying part, a cross between a wolf and some deep-sea nightmare. A long snout lined with rows of serrated fangs, and multiple black, soulless eyes that gleamed with cold intelligence. James felt a chill run down his spine. The Nivrax beast had been terrifying, but this, This thing was designed to kill. A voice boomed overhead. The High Council's announcement rang through the chamber. Behold EZHARNX, a creature that knows NONASTR, a beast, even the EXYOX cannot kill and control. The crowd roared in excitement. James swallowed hard. They expected him to die. He shifted his stance, scanning the creature. It wasn't mindless. That much was clear from the way it moved. Slow, deliberate, almost calculated. This wasn't just some beast. It was a predator that thought. And that made it even more dangerous. Virex stepped closer. His voice was laced with dark amusement. If you are as skilled as you claim, human, then prove it. James let out a slow breath. He had no weapons, no cage to protect him. Just his wits. The Jarnax lunged. James barely dodged in time. He rolled, feeling the rush of wind as its claws slashed through the air, missing him by inches. He hit the ground and sprang up just in time to see the Jarnax twisting toward him with unnatural speed. It was faster than something that size should be. James had seconds to react. He didn't run. Instead, he stood his ground. The Jarnax hesitated for a fraction of a second. Confused, James took a slow step forward. His every instinct screamed at him to flee, but he knew better. Running made you prey. I see you, he murmured, his voice steady. The Jarnax bared its fangs. Its nostrils flared, taking in his scent. James held its gaze, searching for any hint of emotion. Fear? No. Curiosity? Maybe. But there was something else. This wasn't just a mindless beast. The way it moved, the way it studied him, it was like it was waiting for something. Then James noticed it. A scar. Deep, jagged, running along its thick neck. A wound. James narrowed his eyes. This thing had been hurt before. By the Tylox. His heart pounded. That was the key. James slowly raised a hand, palm open. They hurt you, didn't they? He said softly. The Jarnax growled. But there was a hesitation now. James took another step forward. They don't control you, he continued. They just use you. Like a weapon. The crowd above fell silent. The Jarnax's ears twitched. James had its attention. Virex's expression darkened. What are you doing? James ignored him. He took another slow step, watching the beast's eyes. It didn't attack. It was listening. James's mind raced. If he could reach it, if he could make it see him as something other than prey. Virex barked an order. Restrain the beast. Xylox handlers in armored suits rushed forward, energy weapons buzzing to life. The Jarnax snapped. It turned on them. Before James could react, the creature lunged, not at him, but at the Xylox guards. It tore through them like paper. Screams filled the chamber as the massive beast broke free from its chains. James barely had time to dive out of the way as chaos erupted. Alarms blared. The arena became a battlefield. The Jarnax, once a captive, was now a force of destruction. James watched, breathless. He hadn't tamed it. He had freed it. And now, for the first time, the Tylox were experiencing what it meant to be prey. The arena was in chaos. The Jarnax, once a tool of the Tylox, was now an uncontrollable force of destruction. The air was filled with the metallic scent of blood, the acrid burn of energy weapons, and the screams of terrified spectators. The towering beast had broken free, and nothing could stop it. James had barely scrambled to his feet when he saw the first Tylox soldier get torn apart. The creature was fast, faster than anything its size had the right to be. Its massive claws sliced through armor like paper, its fangs crushing bone as it rampaged through the arena. The Tylox had built this creature to kill. Now, it was killing them. James knew he had seconds before the Tylox turned their weapons on both him and the beast. Virex, standing on the command platform above, roared in fury. kill the Jarnax. Kill them both. The soldiers hesitated for a moment, uncertain, then raised their weapons. James reacted instantly. He sprinted toward the nearest fallen Psylocke, grabbing the energy rifle from its lifeless hands. He didn't have time to check the settings. He just aimed and fired. A bright blue blast tore through the air. The first Psylocke soldier collapsed. The Jarnax, hearing the sound, spun toward James, its massive black eyes locking onto him. James froze. For a brief second, the entire world seemed to slow. The beast's nostrils flared. Its muscles tensed. Its razor-sharp claws flexed against the arena floor. Was this it? Was this where he died? Then, something incredible happened. Instead of attacking, it stepped past him. James's heart pounded. The Jarnax didn't see him as prey. Not anymore. But the Psylocke still did. Blaster fire rained down from the upper balconies as more soldiers poured into the chamber. James ducked behind a broken section of the arena wall as explosions erupted around him. The Jarnax roared in fury, its massive form twisting and leaping, dodging energy blasts with terrifying speed. James could see the Psylocke soldiers' faces, twisted in shock and fear. They had never seen anything like this. They had never lost control before. But James knew something they didn't. The Jarnax wasn't fighting blindly. It was choosing its targets. It was going after the Psylocke. And James, it had spared him. A new voice crackled over the loudspeakers, deep and commanding. The Psylocke's High Council. Enough of this. Activate the failsafe. James's stomach dropped. He didn't know what that meant, but he knew it wouldn't be good. Across the arena, a row of massive metal panels slid open. Machines emerged. Tall, insect-like droids, armed with plasma cannons and razor-sharp appendages, marched into formation. Their sleek black bodies gleamed under the harsh lights. Their glowing red eyes locked onto the Jarnax. James swore under his breath. The Psylocke had prepared for this. The Jarnax tensed, sensing the new threat. It let out a low, guttural growl, its muscles rippling with power. Then the first droid fired. A searing red bolt of plasma struck the beast's side, sending it stumbling. The smell of burned flesh filled the air. James acted on instinct. He turned his stolen rifle toward the nearest droid and pulled the trigger. The energy blast slammed into its metallic frame, knocking it back, but not destroying it. These things were built to last. The Jarnax, now enraged, lunged. It tore through the nearest machine, ripping its metal limbs apart with terrifying ease. Sparks flew as the droid collapsed, but the others remained unfazed. James knew they would keep coming. And the Jarnax, despite its power, couldn't fight them forever. He needed a plan. Fast. Then he saw it. A control panel. It was built into the wall behind the Psylocke commanders, likely the system that controlled the droids. If James could get to it, he didn't hesitate. Dodging blaster fire, he sprinted toward the control panel. If the Jarnax could hold them off for just a few more seconds. The beast fought like a demon, slashing and tearing through the mechanical enemies, its deep roars shaking the arena. But James saw it falter. It was slowing down. Another plasma bolt struck its side. The Jarnax staggered. James reached the control panel. His hands flew across the interface, searching for something, anything, that could shut the droids down. Then he saw it. Override command. James slammed his palm against the console. The droids froze. For a split second, the entire arena went silent. Then, an explosion. James barely had time to react before a massive force ripped through the air. The Psylocke had triggered the failsafe manually. James was thrown backward, his vision spinning. The last thing he saw before darkness took him. The Jarnax, standing over him, protecting him. And the Psylocke soldiers, fleeing. Pain. A dull, throbbing ache in James's skull was the first thing he registered as he slowly drifted back to consciousness. His body felt like it had been slammed against a wall, probably because it had been. He opened his eyes to find himself lying on the cold, blood-streaked floor of the arena. Smoke filled the air. The metallic taste of burned circuits lingered in his mouth. The explosion had torn through the control station, leaving twisted wreckage in its wake. And the Jarnax. It was still alive. Barely. The creature was kneeling, massive body heaving with exhaustion. Deep plasma burns marred its black hide, and one of its forelimbs was bent at an unnatural angle. It had fought harder than anything James had ever seen, but it was running out of strength. The Psylocks, however, weren't done. High above the arena, behind thick reinforced glass, the High Council watched in eerie silence. Their glowing red eyes were cold, calculating. They spoke to each other in hushed tones, their words lost in the chaos below. Then, a voice crackled over the loudspeakers. Human. James tensed. He recognized that voice. Virex. You are a fascinating species, the Psylocks commander continued. To stand against us, to challenge us, to survive longer than any primitive being should. James slowly pushed himself up, every muscle in his body protesting. He was not in the mood for a villainous monologue. However, Virex continued, his voice thick with amusement. You misunderstand your place. A loud mechanical whir filled the air. James turned just in time to see a new enemy emerge. Not droids. Not soldiers. Something worse. A hulking, cybernetic beast stepped onto the battlefield. It was unlike anything James had ever seen, easily 3 times the size of the Zarnax, its metallic limbs reinforced with gleaming black armor. Energy cores pulsed beneath its exoskeleton, and its yellow reptilian eyes locked onto its wounded target. James's stomach dropped. This wasn't just some war machine. This was something that Psylocks had bred. Something built to hunt. A countermeasure against the Jarnax. The beast let out a low, guttural growl, deep enough to make the arena tremble. The Jarnax, injured and exhausted, still tried to stand. James could see the truth. It was too weak. It wouldn't win this fight. And James was out of options. Then, an idea. A reckless, insane, suicidal idea. He sprinted toward the Jarnax. The cybernetic beast charged. James jumped. Landing next to the wounded creature, he did the only thing he could. He reached out and placed a hand against its hide. It was a desperate gamble. But if humans could bond with the deadliest creatures on Earth, maybe. Asterisk, asterisk, just maybe. Asterisk, asterisk, he could do the same here. The Jarnax turned its head. Its dark, intelligent eyes locked onto James. James didn't flinch. He pushed past his fear. Come on, he whispered. One last fight. A second passed. Then, the Jarnax moved. Not with blind rage, not with desperation, but with purpose. It understood. James wasn't controlling it. He wasn't dominating it. He was fighting with it. The cybernetic beast lunged. But the Jarnax, now with renewed strength, moved like a shadow, dodging at the last possible second. Its claws tore across the machine's flank, sparks flying as metal plating was ripped away. James didn't stop to think. He sprinted toward the wreckage of the control panel, scanning for anything useful. Then, he found it. A detonator. One of the Psylocks soldiers had been carrying a failsafe, a last resort explosive meant to destroy the Jarnax if it ever got out of control. James snatched it up. He turned back to the fight. The Jarnax was fading again. The cybernetic beast was too strong, too armored. The Jarnax had speed, but it was losing ground. James gritted his teeth. He had one shot. He sprinted forward, dodging past falling debris, and jumped. He landed on the cybernetic beast's back. It roared in fury. James held on for dear life. His fingers fumbled for the detonator. Seconds. He had seconds. The beast bucked. James planted the explosive on its core. Then he jumped. The explosion was instant. A deafening boom shook the arena as the cybernetic beast was engulfed in fire. Its mechanical screams echoed as its body collapsed, flames consuming it from the inside out. James hit the ground hard. The world spun. His lungs burned. When he looked up, the Jarnax was still standing. Barely. And the Tylox. For the first time, they looked afraid. James forced himself up, breathing heavily. He turned toward the High Council, lifting his chin defiantly. "Looks like your beasts aren't so unbeatable after all," he muttered. Silence. Then, the High Council stood. One by one, the Tylox turned and left. James exhaled slowly. It wasn't a victory. Not yet. But he had bought time. And now he had something even more valuable. An ally. The Jarnax, battered and bruised, lowered its massive head. James reached out. This time, he didn't hesitate. His hand met its hide. For the first time in history, a human had tamed the untamable. And the galaxy would never be the same. The wind howled across the ruined arena, carrying the scent of burning metal and scorched flesh. Smoke curled upward in thick plumes, twisting into the cold alien sky. The once mighty cybernetic beast lay in a heap of smoldering wreckage, its metallic body reduced to little more than scrap. Sparks flickered from its exposed circuits, and the acrid stench of melted wiring hung in the air. James stood in the center of the battlefield, his chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. His body ached from head to toe, bruised and battered from the brutal fight. Blood trickled from a gash above his eyebrow, dripping onto the cracked floor. But he was alive, and so was the Jarnax. The massive creature loomed beside him, its dark, reptilian eyes locked onto the retreating figures of the Psylocke's High Council. The alien overlords, who had watched the battle with arrogant detachment, were now afraid. Their grand experiment had failed. The human they had so casually thrown into the pit had survived, and won. James glanced at the Jarnax. It was wounded, its black hide marred by deep gashes and burns, but it stood tall, muscles tensed, poised for another fight if necessary. A silent understanding passed between them. They were not enemies. Not anymore. A sudden roar of machinery made James whirl around. Reinforcements. From the far end of the arena, a squad of Psylocke soldiers marched in perfect unison, their gleaming black armor reflecting the fires around them. Their weapons hummed with lethal energy, aimed directly at James and the Jarnax. James clenched his fists. Of course, the Tylox wouldn't let this end so easily. One of the soldiers stepped forward, his helmet gleaming under the flickering lights. "Human," he said, voice sharp and mechanical. "You have defied the High Council. You will be taken for reconditioning. Surrender now, and your suffering will be minimal." James let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Yeah, I don't think so." The Jarnax let out a low growl, baring its serrated fangs. The Psylocke soldiers hesitated, gripping their weapons a little tighter. Even they weren't certain if their energy rifles could put down a creature like this, not after everything it had survived. James took a slow step backward, placing a steadying hand on the Jarnax's hide. He had no intention of dying here. But escape? That was another matter entirely. His mind raced, searching for options. The arena was a sealed chamber, designed to be inescapable. The high walls stretched for hundreds of feet, reinforced with alien alloys stronger than steel. The only exit was the towering gates on the far side, and they were heavily guarded. Then he noticed something. The wreckage of the cybernetic beast still smoldered nearby, but within the twisted remains, its power core still pulsed with energy. An idea struck him, a dangerous, reckless idea. "Cover me," James muttered to the Jarnax before breaking into a sprint. The soldiers reacted instantly, raising their rifles. Energy blasts streaked toward him, searing through the air. But before they could hit, the Jarnax moved. With a deafening roar, it charged. It was a blur of muscle and claws, striking like a force of nature. The nearest soldiers were thrown back as it swiped through their ranks, tearing through armor like paper. The Tylock scrambled to respond, firing wildly, but the creature was too fast. It weaved between them with terrifying precision, scattering their formation. That was all the distraction James needed. He reached the fallen war beast, skidding to a stop beside its ruined form. His fingers worked quickly, prying open a damaged panel on its side. Beneath the layers of metal, the core glowed, unstable, volatile. Perfect. James grabbed a loose energy conduit, the heat searing his fingertips, and yanked. The core surged. Alarms blared as a deep hum built up, the telltale sign of an impending overload. James wasted no time. He turned and ran. "Jarnax," he shouted. "Move." The creature didn't hesitate. With one final swipe that sent an unfortunate soldier flying across the arena, it spun on its heel and bolted after James. The remaining Tylock soldiers barely had time to process what was happening before. Boom! The explosion ripped through the arena with earth-shaking force. Fire and debris erupted into the air, consuming everything in a brilliant inferno. The shockwave sent bodies flying, tearing apart the arena's structural supports. The once indestructible walls cracked and buckled under the force, and within moments, the entire battlefield was collapsing. James didn't stop running. He didn't look back. The only thing that mattered was reaching the exit. The towering gates loomed ahead, still locked. But the explosion had weakened them, shaking the very foundations of the arena. The metal groaned, fractures snaking across its surface. James gritted his teeth. One more push. The Jarnax roared in agreement. Together, they slammed into the gates. The metal shattered. A blinding light flooded James's vision as he and the Jarnax burst through, emerging into the open world beyond. The cold night air hit his face like a slap, and for the first time since his capture, he saw the stars. Freedom. Behind them, the arena collapsed entirely, disappearing into a swirling cloud of dust and flame. The Tylocks would survive. They always did. But tonight, they had lost. James turned to the Jarnax, breathing hard. It met his gaze, unblinking, unwavering. They had fought together, survived together, and now, they were something more. A soldier and a beast, a warrior and a weapon, a team. And the galaxy would never be the same.